This is a very interesting and unique show on an artist which all of us know the scream. I mean, this is a ubiquitous image. It's one of those things that basically is one of the best known images in Western art at this stage of the game, along with Andy's Campbell Soup Can and Mona Lisa. It's right up there. The show at the Clark is really featuring work that has to do with the landscape and his relationship to the landscape and his landscape paintings, which happened basically after, well, there were some that were taking place in the 1880s, 1890s, but for the most part, his focus on the landscape came after about 1909. So what I'll do is plug into this. Yeah, all right. Norwegian artist Edvard Munch is best known for his vivid depictions of love, anxiety, and death. Raised in a strict religious household, one impacted by the early loss of his mother and sister, Munch once poetically stated, "Sickness, insanity, and death were the black angels that guarded my cradle." The artist has been understood as an isolated, melancholy figure. His early years were indeed marked with struggle as he faced critical censure and battled addiction and mental illness. By his mid-30s, after Munch sought natural cures and medical attention, he found emotional stability and commercial success at home and in Germany, where he lived for many years. When he returned to Norway for short stays, settling there permanently in 1909, Munch lived in a variety of rented and purchased residencies in the countryside, preferring natural settings to the urban environment. And so you can see, basically there's 4 versions of the screen that I put up there. There are even more than that. There are 4 painted versions, and then probably a dozen variations in print form, woodcuts, etchings, and then different printing techniques and all that. One of the things about Munch is he definitely, worked thematically. So he would do a series and work something up. So I am going to go here. The show at the Clark is not Munch as usual. The first painting, The Yellow Log, in 1912, is slightly goofy, high-spirited, devoid of figures, and barely registers as a Munch. Its loose painterly realism depicts some freshly cut yellow-orange logs lying among the trees and purple trunks. So he was using, complementary colors opposite on the color wheel. So there's a real, that yellow log really comes straight out at us and hits us in the face. On the right, you see one of his really beautiful landscapes. And his technique was to use very light washes of thinned oil paint with turpentine to build up layers that kind of shimmer on the canvas. It's a really lovely technique, and very much, has a kind of transparency and translucence that you get out of watercolor. Okay. Munch was academically trained. He adopted a bohemian lifestyle in the autumn of 1882, started sharing a studio with some friends, and Christian Kronk, who became their tutor and mentor. He was exposed to Impressionism, and, kind of encouraged to explore different techniques. This is much different from the naturalism that was very prominent at that time in kind of the Norwegian academy. And so it was met with mixed reception. The conservative critics didn't like this fuzziness, but the more widely knowledgeable artists who had traveled to Europe, who had traveled to Paris and seen what the Impressionists were about at that time, really got what was going on here. Munch tended throughout his career to develop thematic ideas, coming back to certain emotionally charged images. This painting is one of his sister dying of tuberculosis at 14, when Edvard was 15. And here you see 6 different versions of it. There are actually many more. Countless drawings, pastels, prints. And then I also put in Death in the Sick Room, which is another one of his early masterpieces, which again met with mixed critical responses. Munch's focus was on an emotional response. He was really going after what I like to call psychodrama. He's got these Strindbergian scenes, and there's a cast of characters in there that repeatedly come up in different situations, and you'll see more of this. Now, I'm going to move through this period of time fairly quickly because I want to get to the landscapes, which is actually the focus of the Clark show. These pieces, the death of his sister, the whole what he calls frieze of life series, is something that has been focused on quite a bit in other shows. So I want to get to what is really the more interesting part of what this show is about. But from naturalism to impressionism to symbolism is what I want you to get out of this particular slide. So we're going from a kind of impressionistic state through more expressive qualities. And when you look at the Death in the Sick Room, it's simplified. It's very much a symbolic representation of that state of grief and loss. And here is the family. He lost his mother. I believe he was 8, but in his early childhood, she died of tuberculosis. The sister died of tuberculosis at 14. He got tuberculosis and battled that in his youth, and managed to overcome it. But his sister, his other sister, was also mentally unstable and was in and out of institutions. The father was kind of piously religious, and it really marred Munch deeply. So here we are. Throughout his lifetime, he created around 80 self-portraits that we know of. And that's just the paintings, not the drawings and etchings and everything else. So he really reflected on himself a lot throughout his lifetime. And this really amazing painting, Self-Portrait Between the Clock and the Bed, is his last self-portrait. He died in 44 at 80 years old. For all the self-destructive and suicidal thoughts that he had at an early age, he managed to stick it out. So Munch really stood at the crossroads of modernism. He continued to confront mortality throughout his career. I believe it was 1890, he won a scholarship to go and study in Paris. His father wanted him to be an engineer, but continued to support him grudgingly in his chosen career as an artist. So Munch traveled to Paris. He saw Van Gogh. He saw Gauguin, whose symbolic work affected him. He saw the symbolists in Paris. There was a symbolist movement throughout Europe. So actually taking the images and condensing them, distilling them to kind of essential emotional impact was something that Munch picked up on and carried forward. He was a powerful influence on somebody like Matisse. Matisse saw the use of color as an emotional vehicle, and Munch played that out to a great degree. He was very powerfully influenced the French and German modernists. In fact, Munch was included in the first Fauvist show, the French expressionist show that took place. I believe that was in 1907 or 06, something like that. And so the feedback, the back and forth of Munch influencing these people and these artists influencing him, this is something which goes on in the art world, but really the early work of Munch was very courageous in many ways. And again, he came back. He lived in Germany for a number of years, and influenced a lot of the early German expressionists and I will show you one of those. So here is Ernst Ludwig Kirchner and this, kind of fabulous, crazy piece. Again, Scream, one of the best known pieces in the world. This sense of isolation, of despair in modern life, the sense of alienation, rage, raw sexuality, melancholy, and attacking social ills. Really, this was all meat for the German expressionists. A road mapped out by Munch. So the Frieze of Life series, which the Scream and this Dance of Life piece are all part of, was actually begun in Germany in the 1890s. He was there for a few years, and really did a lot of the drawings for the series, and then it would continue when he came back to Norway. Now, during this time, he was an alcoholic. He was carousing in the bars and getting into fights, and really struggling with depression, suicidal, and it really took him. Well, basically, I'll talk about his nervous breakdown, which did happen in 1908, 1909. But I'm going to go on and plug into some more of this Frieze of Life series. Before I go there, though, to put this into context, I'm going to actually come in and do a zoom in on these faces, these crazy faces on these characters. I mean, these are pretty bizarre characters we got going here. And he was not the only one who was dealing with this. The Belgian artist James Ensor was doing these crazy symbolist mask paintings, and had these crazy distorted characters interacting in society. You see this portrait as a skeleton painter. So Munch was not the only one who was touched by this, although Munch's take on it was to draw from his deeply resonating personal experiences from his childhood and trying to deal with that trauma in some way, or at least embody that trauma in his paintings. So despair, displaying emotion that could be seen as related to dissociative or depression and borderline personality disorder. I got this one off of somebody's commentary on this piece. That doesn't come from me. I'm not doing clinical analysis here. But melancholy. There's about 6 different versions of this melancholy piece where the head's turned in different directions, and one of the other things that I wanted to say, and I'm going to go back actually to here and say what's going on in this scene. None of these people in the family are interacting with one another. No one's facing each other. The only person who's facing someone is someone that we can't see, which is the dying sister in the chair. Munch is on his way out the door. This is really about the dissolution of the family. I thought that was important at this point for me to point out that this is something which he dealt with over these years. So again, I mentioned this Strindbergian cast of characters which keep turning up in different situations, and this guy, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Over okay, so these were actually quite shocking for many viewers, and at one time he did a show in, I believe it was in Germany, it could have been in Norway, I can't remember where, but he had an exhibit of the entire Freeze series up, and the police came and closed it down for a period of time. It was raising such a public outcry. They reopened it, and it was viewed. Now, with all that, there were collectors and artists that supported the work. By the end of the 1890s, he was doing very well. He was supporting his birth family. His father died, I believe, in 1890, and he took on the support of the family. So it was always a struggle for him, but he did do very well with he had certain collectors that continued to back him up, and he did do shows. He did shows in Paris. He did shows which got great critical acclaim and did make sales. In 1912, he had his first show in New York City, and I believe that did fairly well also. So again, the voice, this kind of symbolic language that he's developed. One of the stories around the Scream was he was out for a walk with a few of his friends, and he became overwhelmed by a sense of anxiety and despair, and had to stop walking, and his friends walked on without him. And he said, from deep in the earth, a great scream welled up inside of me. So there's this whole symbolic relationship to sound, to the voice. And again, this mystery of a summer night. If you look at this painting, it's an interesting painting. It's kind of moody and all that. But if you notice in the right-hand corner, there's a rock with a face on it and this wacky smile. So there's this anthropomorphizing of nature that is something which he comes back to again and again. It's really part of his kind of pantheistic, transcendental philosophy. All things are connected. We are connected to the earth. We're the rhythms of nature live within us. That whole notion. So, all right, I'm going to move on. Munch used more than one title, including Loving Woman and Madonna for this piece. That's a again, a very famous piece. It's kind of love and death. Um, and then the vampire also had several different names. Love and Pain was one of them. So, he's bending down into her lap, and the man buries his head in the woman's lap, and she embraces him, placing her mouth on the back of his neck, the blood red hair draped around the man's body like blood. Okay, we're gonna move on to this. Angst, anxiety. You know, this is really, the man lived with this for quite a while. Again, these took place over about 10 or 15 years. And I think, one only needs to look at somebody like Van Gogh, whose productive period was really only about 10 years. So at the conclusion of this, in the early 1900s, he was beginning to make these really delightful pieces, along with these really painful pieces. He was going into nature for solace, and there's I don't sense the angst-driven Munch in this piece. It's rhythmic, it's lively, but it isn't that edgy, tormented character. And again, this is a very different view of woman. This is not the battle of the sexes. This is a kind of inclusive and interactive view that comes in these pieces. Again, this very loose, washy technique that he's developed. It's really, lovely shimmering quality that comes out in these pieces. It's really loose, very free. And at the same time as he was doing these pieces, he also was doing quite accomplished portraiture. He had commissions throughout his career, not necessarily flattering, but honest and direct, and playful to some degree. And this was the children of Dr. Lund, who was one of Munch's collectors and great supporter. It's a large scale piece. Now, this is 56 by 78. Munch did do, and I will show you later, murals in quite a few situations. He did very large scale pieces at times. I had always thought of him as doing, smaller scale work, but that's not true. And again, this animated sense of this rocky beach, it's like a bunch of Mexican jumping beans hopping around on the shore. They're really lively, and there is communication going on between them in some way. They take the place of the figures in the landscape. And again, here we are. This is 1911. Oslo, Ulla University. This series is of 11 large-scale paintings created for the walls of the. It's actually a kind of auditorium. And this is a larger scale version of things that I already showed you right at the beginning when I first opened it. There was this the sun piece that I showed you. And it's quite an uplifting, upbeat image for somebody who was so hooked up with that angst-driven work. Again, this is after his stay in the sanitarium. He has overcome his alcoholism to some degree. That's under control. And he's taken what he calls the water cure, whatever that is, spends a lot of time bathing and all that. Okay, and here is Munch at he bought a 45-acre estate, Ekli, outside Oslo. He lived and worked there for 28 years. He had an indoor and outdoor studio there. It is now it was bought by the state, and it is a kind of state-run artist retreat and museum. And here are, some indications of the places where he had houses or lived. He had Asgard Strand. He had a small cottage there until, basically for 20 years. And used to go there for retreats when he was living in Germany. He used to leave Germany and go there for the summers and rejuvenate, recuperate. And he needed that. Okay. View from Nordstrand. Beautiful painting. Return to nature for the sense of connection missing in other parts of his life. He never married. He had affairs with married and unmarried women. And, basically one of those affairs, the scars of his childhood really held him back from a long-term marriage. That marriage just seemed untenable to him. He had a long-term affair with a wealthy and cultured woman who pushed for marriage, but in the end, Munch broke it off. At some point, there was some kind of a struggle with her with a gun, and he got part of one of his fingers shot off. Some crazy story like that. I'm not quite clear about what happened there, whether she brought the gun to the knife fight or it was something that was just there and it went off by mistake. Don't know. But interesting note about his ambiguous, ambivalent relationship with women. And really he was devoted to his paintings and stuck with that. Again, nature was his solace. And the photograph on the right is a photograph from a very similar location to the spot where he did this wonderful painting on the left. And again, the kind of anthropomorphic quality of those trees in the Munch painting, they're kind of like these giants, these kind of Nordic legendary creatures living in the woods. You can see a face, you can see faces emerge and go away in these. And again, the modernist explorations of his work are quite a revelation, to me anyway. Many of these notions would be taken up later in the century. You know, this very wonderful, loose, wacky study of waves, really kind of reminiscent of abstract expressionist painting. I could see Rothko or somebody like Joan Mitchell doing something like this. And on the right, these kind of non-painted figures, really wonderful, open quality to it. And it is signed. So, you know, he felt that this piece was finished as for what he was after in it. And I'm gonna go here, and this Milton Avery reminded me a bit of that set of waves, the simplification, the rhythmic quality of the brushwork, and this Matisse, this late Matisse, done, you know, basically. This piece was 1919. This piece is 1947. The simplification and absence of heavy articulation of the figures has a resonance with that early Munch piece. And again, the water cure, he's got the female bathers, he's got male bathers, they you know. And again, on the right is a wonderful picture of, I'd love to go to Norway. It's a very beautiful painting too. I mean, you know, it's beautiful, it's upbeat, it's Arcadian, fantasy. And again, you know, he did a lot of female nudes, but we're back to this water cure for the male bathers. He did dozens and dozens of large scale compositions of male bathers. They're kind of this image of virility and kind of this back to nature movement. But he did a lot of female nudes, some of which could have been his lovers. We don't know that, but it's interesting to see the juxtaposition, the strength and repose, the business of the male swimmers, all very active, they're all moving and all that in the whole series that I've seen. And the female nudes are reposed, are quiet, or tranquil. You know, not saying anything about you know, my opinion about his take on male-female relationships. That's something different, and I'm not touching it. Let's see. Okay, and here's the man out in one of his studios at Eckley. He painted outdoors. He left his paintings out here. rain, snow, all kinds of stuff. He would paint out there, actually 3 seasons out of the year. He also had an indoor studio too, but there was a kind of austerity to him. He had really, after his stay at the asylum, he preferred very few friends. He did have them. And he really thought of his paintings as his children. So that kind of was his focus. But he was a prodigious letter writer, and he took no students, but communicated with artists and writers and the literati throughout his career. He wrote and wrote a lot. He wrote a lot about his own work. There are many journals that are out there, and quite insightful. There might be giants. The tree shapes take on, again, this kind of Nordic fairy tale quality, and we'll go to fairy tale forest. There are faces that come and go inside these trees. Again, giants, trolls. This one's a rather dark veined fairy tale, but hey, fairy tales can be pretty dark veined. And the forest pieces, there's a kind of dreamlike quality that pervades these pieces. And again, if you look at the elm that's in the right, in the left painting, there's sort of a head of some kind of a beast. Is it a cow? Is it a bull? Is it a elk? We don't know what it is, but it's some kind of an animal-like head in there. And the landscape undulates in both of these pieces. They're animated. These trees walk around on their own when we're not looking. They walk around on their own in these paintings while we're looking. And his indebtedness to Van Gogh, he spoke about Van Gogh and said, Van Gogh held the torch high and burnt out, and I held my torch high and rekindled it in my old age. And here we are in the Garden of Eden, tending the orchard, back to the earth again, digging in the ground. That sense of relationship to the seasons and the growth in nature is something which again and again comes back in these later pieces. And the apple tree in the garden, there's his house up on the hill above that. And this is a shot of him walking towards his studio. So this painting, many of these paintings took place over a number of years. They hung out, they look very fresh and all that, but he would hang out with them for a long period of time and come back and paint them. Often he didn't sign his paintings until they left his studio. And in fact, even at that, there are letters from people who bought his prints asking him, sending back the print to him, asking him to sign it, and he would sign it and send it back to them. So when he died in 1944, he left his entire estate to I believe it was the university, but it may have been the museum in Oslo. Yeah, he was very nervous when the Germans came in and took over. He was labeled a decadent artist by the Nazis. But when they came up to his studio, and this SS officer came up to his studio and saw the austerity with which he lived, and saw the outdoor studio and all of that, they left him alone. I don't know if that's saying we can't do anything worse to this guy, or that he was so impressive with his kind of naturalism that they left him alone. But for whatever reason, they did leave him alone, which is a blessing. And these late wonderful pieces, again, this delightful work, the artist drawing energy, this dynamic swirling energy from these pieces. This is one of his late self-portraits, and you can see how stable this late self-portrait is. Still searching, still with a very staunch demeanor, but very solid in and of himself. And this whole thing of labor, of working the fields, that's again a theme of his late work is really attached to that. And I'm going to end with the self-portrait between the clock and the bed. You know, this is quite a poignant image, and one which is I believe in the show, but it actually was the focal point of a show that was in New York not too long ago. I can't remember when it was. It had to have been pre-pandemic, but so there are lectures on YouTube. The opening lecture for this show at the Clark, Edvard Munch, Trembling Earth. One of the other things I wanted to say is he really addressed this issue of ecology, of the threat of the industrialization of Norway. Basically, you know, Norway was fishing and timber, and by the 40s, the timber industry had decimated much of the old growth forests throughout Norway. So that's another reason to look at this guy and say, you know, there's something else that's relevant to us today in this work. So that's it.
God, he much more to him than you realize, you know.
Much more to him than the scream.
Yeah, than the scream, right? Oh, thanks, Larry. This is really interesting.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. I hope we see you tonight or next week on Friday night. And a couple of compliments. I usually avoid interesting, greater than dismal despair. Well, I should read this up.